Hi there. My name's Ben Terwilliger. I'm the Executive Director of the Eudora Area Historical Society in Eudora, Kansas. And today I'm going to be taking you on a walking tour down Church Street. When Eudora was first established in the 1850s, all the streets in Eudora were either named after letters of the alphabet or numbers. So the furthest east, the street the furthest east in Eudora was named A Street, then B Street, C Street, and so on. In the mid-20th century, the city decided to rename a lot of these streets after trees. So A Street became Ash, B became Birch, but C Street, which is what Church Street was, wasn't named after a tree. Instead, it was named Church Street because there were many churches on this street. So that kind of makes sense. Church Street is home to some of the most historic and oldest buildings in the Eudora community. And today I'm going to take you on a walking tour of those buildings from 6th Street until 10th Street. We don't have information on all the buildings. We do have information on the majority of them though. So if we skip over a building, it's not because it's not historic. It's just because we don't yet have a lot of information on that building. I encourage anyone watching this to share in the comments below any information they know on any of the buildings that we cover on this tour. And the majority of the information from this tour are from two books written by two local historians. There is the first book that is the basis of a lot of this information is Older Houses of Eudora, which is written by Cindy Higgins. And then the second book is Vintage Eudora Architecture, which is written by Leonard Hallman. And so without their work, we wouldn't really be able to do this live tour today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm right here at the corner of 6th and Church Street. I'm turning the camera around. Let's see, yeah. There's the thing. There it is. And we're going to start with that house right there with that cute little dog out front. So this house I'm walking to right now, that's 601 Church Street. This is an older house of the Eudora area. You can tell it's older based on its design. The design of that house is what we call an I house, because these houses were common in the states of Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa. And a colloquial term for these houses is two up and two down. So you might hear that expression as well. But we can tell this is an older house just based on its architecture. It's been restored in recent years, and it has shiplap siding. And that's all we really have on that house. And wish I could pet that poor dog, but I'm going to keep the tour moving along to our next stop, which is that building up there. That is a house that's at 610 Church Street. This building was built around 1876, and it was in use as a church up until about 1920. This was one of Eudora's three black churches. Eudora had three black churches in its history. This was the African American Methodist Church. Some members of this church split off and built the first missionary Baptist church, which stood at 622 Locust Street, which was demolished around 1987. Eudora had a sizable black community. About 25% of Eudora was black in the late 19th century. And today there's no black churches currently in operation in Eudora. So that's the first church that we'll go by on this street. The next building is 623 Church Street. This is known as Turner Hall. It was originally built around 1882 for the Deutsche Turnverein, which was a German men's organization. It was used as a classroom as well from 1894 to 1908. And now it's a residence. These clubs were really popular in the Midwest, especially in Kansas. There was one in Lawrence. And the first president of Eudora's Turner Society was actually John Siebold, who was the man who built our museum building at 720 Main Street. So that was the old Turner Society. Hi there. This house is our next stop. This is 626 Church Street. The old Eudora Grade and High School were located here in 1903. This building was built in 1903. In 1918, the new high school was built at 10th and Church Street, and so this was just the grade school. There was a second story when this was a school building. During the sunflower ammunition period during the 1940s, this was much too small to house Eudora's elementary students, so they built a new elementary school just south of the high school at 10th and Main Street. And then, of course, later on, this building was remodeled into apartments by Louis Hayes, with the top floor being removed. Here we have an empty lot. It used to be used as a parking lot for the Methodist Church. So the next building I'm walking up to at 703 Church Street was the former United Methodist Church of Eudora, which was completed in 1924 following the merger of the English and German Methodists. It was built on the Akron plan, which was in vogue at the time and promoted by the Methodist denomination. The Akron plan called for a central worship space to be flanked by Sunday school rooms, which could be opened up. The church is typical of many built in that plan, a square structure with the entrance in one corner and the pulpit in the opposite corner. The church had balconies on two sides. The balconies and the areas beneath could also be closed off for Sunday school classes by lowering roll-down wooden curtains and subsequently raised for worship participation. The large basement with no obstruction supports was used for basketball before 1940. There were showers for athletes. During the influx of workers for the sunflower ammunition plant in 1942, the school could not... Wait a minute, I'm reading from the wrong one there. So anyway, this was the Methodist Church up until about 2006, I believe. And in 2006, the Methodists built their new church south of town. And so this one they sold. And I believe it is a residence. I'm not sure if it's currently occupied or not. You can see there's a tree growing on the roof right there. But it's a really neat old brick building. And I'll walk a little closer to it. You can see the cornerstone there, Methodist Church, ME Methodist Church. That house over there is on the tour as well. Right there, that's 702 Church Street. It's an older 1.5-story home, which was likely built before 1900. It's been considerably remodeled. Old-timers know this as the Oscar Westerhouse place. When housing was scarce during the World War II period, there was a teacher that lived in the garage at that house. So this building right here is one of the oldest buildings in town. It was probably built in the 1850s. As you can tell there, the building was made out of limestone there, and it's been stuccoed, but the lower part there has been exposed to see the limestones. There was actually a member of the Fish tribe that built this house. Pascal Fish's brother lived here at one point in the 1850s and 1860s. And later on, this was the home to a neighborhood grocery store, which was attached to the south side where the driveway is now. The store was operated by Charlie Newstifter from the 1880s on and closed in the 1930s. In the 1950s, the Lee Coleman family lived in this house. This house right here is 715 Church Street. This house is built in the Queen Anne style, similar to the one at 723 Church Street. It was likely built around 1895, and the house retains its original fireplace and ornate woodwork. The roof construction at the rear would seem to be an indication that one-story structure was adapted from plans for a two-story. This was the Methodist Parsonage for a number of years. The Methodists purchased this home in 1927 from Charles Schlegel when Reverend E.E. Holler was pastor. It was sold after the George Bourne property at 623 Church Street was purchased in 1962, and a new parsonage and parking lot were constructed. The corner fireplace in the living room of the old parsonage provided a lovely setting for weddings of many couples over the years. That building across the street there, 718 Church Street, is the Salem Chapel, which was formerly the Salem Evangelical United Brethren Church, originally the Salem Evangelical Church. This is now a private residence. The main rectangular part of the structure was built in 1870, and the belfry and south wing were added in 1905. In 1966, Salem merged with the Methodist Church at 7th and Church Street, and services were discontinued. Salem and St. Paul were both German evangelical churches, but two different denominations. St. Paul was affiliated with the Evangelical Synod of North America, headquartered in St. Louis, and Salem was affiliated with the Evangelical Association, headquartered in Cleveland. The parking lot on the north side of the Salem Church had once been an early brick house, which was home to Dr. Payne in the early 20th century. The building was purchased by the Methodists after the death of Lee Irwin, the last resident of the church, of the building behind there. We have a number of Salem church-related artifacts in our museum, including a sign that said 1870 on it, which used to hang at the front of that building. Many of us know this house right here because it was home to Leonard Hallman for a number of years. Leonard Hallman was the secretary of the Historical Society and a very talented historian. This house was built by Carl Durr. It was completed in 1895. Construction started a year earlier. Durr and his wife Blanche moved in on their wedding night. From 1904 to 1946, this was home of Eudora's druggist, Homer White, and his family. The house is in the late Victorian Queen Anne style. Note the complex roof lines, extensive use of gingerbread, and a two-story bay window. There is some evidence that the size of the house was scaled down from plans for a larger structure. Durr worked with a carpenter in Old West Lawrence, where many large homes were built. More elaborate houses in the Queen Anne style, such as the Pillow House, also were built. This house probably had Eudora's second bathroom after the Pillow House, built a year earlier. Water was pumped by hand in the basement from a cistern up to a tank in the attic. During dry spells, a privy in the backyard was used. The Carriage House, which you see right there, is a recent addition constructed in the 1980s, almost entirely from salvaged house parts. And we sure do miss Leonard. He did a great job taking care of this house for a long time. And of course now a new family has moved in at this house, and they're taking great care of it as well. It's definitely one of Eudora's most ornate Victorian era houses, and it's a really neat house. So this house across the street, that is 730 Church Street. This was originally the Temperance Union Hall, constructed in November of 1879. It later served as the English Methodist Church from 1886 until 1922, when the English Methodists merged with the German Methodists and began constructing a new church at 7th and Church. At that time, the building was remodeled into a residence. The Herman Bonsack family lived here for many years. The German Methodist Church and Parsonage once stood north of this vacant lot. What's interesting about this building to me is that it was a temperance hall in a place like Eudora. Eudora was obviously a German community and was therefore a beer drinking community. Temperance was very unpopular in Eudora. Temperance was the abolition of alcohol, which was part of a movement in Kansas in the 19th century. Kansas actually became the first state to outlaw alcohol in 1881. So 2 years after this building was built, the Temperance Hall had achieved their goal, and alcohol was illegal in Kansas. And it was after that that it became a church. Of course, Eudora residents were not fond of prohibition, and many of Eudora's residents openly broke the prohibition laws at that time. So this house is next. That is 731 Church. The main part of this house is reported to have been built in the 1860s. The south wing is a later addition, probably prior to 1900, that had a flat roof similar to the Durr House at the northwest corner of Elm and 7th Streets until the 1980s, when it was remodeled and given a sloped roof. The dormers were also added at that time. The Milburn family lived here during the first half of the 20th century, and the Gruber family lived here until the mid-1980s. This house is 739 Church Street. It's an older house built before 1900. This was the residence of Adolph Lotz Jr. in 1900. Later, Catherine Rothberger lived here for many years. This is an earlier house with 2 full stories, additions at the back. And this is St. Paul. St. Paul United Church of Christ, formerly St. Paul Evangelical and Reformed Church, and originally St. Paul Evangelical Church. The present building was built in 1913, replacing an earlier structure built before 1871. The ceiling of the sanctuary mimics the complex roof structure. 2 huge trusses at the front and rear of the attic support the structure. The educational wing on the east side of the building, which I think we see right there, was built in 1980. And to my knowledge, this is the only still functioning church on Church Street with an active congregation. So that makes it very important and unique because it's preserving a part of our history, which has largely gone away, and the fact that most churches have relocated away from Church Street. This house is our next stop. This is 802 Church Street. This was once owned by Dr. William Robinson in 1900, who had an office in a small building on the corner. The older front part of the house is 1.5 stories, while the back part, added before 1912, is 2 full stories. The house was restored around 1980, at which time the breezeway and carriage house were added, which you see right there. During the restoration, the house was gutted and the interior completely modernized. The back 2-story part had a flat roof until recent years, when a garbled roof was built on top of the old one. Dr. Robinson made house calls in the horse and buggy days. He started out at the American House at 739 Main Street, which later became the Pennsylvania Hotel. Robinson served as mayor of Eudora, justice of the peace, and a precinct committeeman. During his time as mayor, the city parks were platted and most of the trees planted in Eudora. So that house right there is 803 Church Street, and this is an early 20th century house. After the turn of the century, colonial style homes regained popularity and their influence appeared on many houses not otherwise colonial in style. Round columns supporting the porch, which you see there, were replaced on the turnpost of Victorian houses. Until recent times, the porch floor was rounded to match the porch roof. At one time, the Griffin family lived here, who was at one point a mayor of Eudora. Here's another older Eudora house. I can tell it was built in the I style. It would be an I house, 810 Church Street. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information on this house, other than I would say it's probably a house that dates to the 1860s, maybe the 1870s. You can always tell the age of a house just based on its style, and I can tell this house was built around that time period based on the architecture and based on the foundation. You can usually tell. Obviously, buildings with a stone foundation were built before 1900 generally. Places with cement foundations were built later on. So that house right there is 811 Church Street. which is a unique house here because this house was originally one of 6 houses built for employees at the Sinclair pumping station south of town. I think everyone knows the Sinclair pumping station. It's that large brick building on Church Street when you go south of Eudora for a few miles. Originally, there were 6 houses out there that housed the workers. The plant closed in 1940. It opened in 1923. After it closed in 1940, a number of the houses out there were picked up and moved into Eudora. To my knowledge, there's at least 2 that still survive today, and this is one of them. This house was moved to Eudora in the late 1940s. Moving the house was laborious, with dollies under each corner and teams of horses pulling. Winches were used to round the corners and turn the house to back it onto the foundation at its new home. The house's 5 sisters were also relocated in the community, and most exist today. The Scotts lived here after the house was relocated. This is another older Eudora house right here. You can see the original part, which was probably the I house right there, the rectangular part, and then you can see the additions built on later on. But once again, I don't have a lot of information on this house right here. That's 809 Church Street, which is another older house. Again, it's an I house. The front part was built after 1878 by Joshua Reber, and the back part was added on by his son Daniel Reber, father of Ella Reber, who married Charles Gerstenberger. Charles and Ella lived here from 1919 on, Ella finally passing away in the 1970s. Charles had an IGA grocery store on the west side of Main Street in the 700 block in the 1930s and 40s. And that's 809 Church Street. It's a little peculiar, I think, in that, and I'm not sure why this is, maybe someone can explain it to me. That house is 809, that house is 811. Typically, you know, they go in increasing order. You start down there at 800 and you end up at 840. But for whatever reason, those houses have flipped addresses. I'm sure there's an explanation behind that out there. So right there, that's 823 Church Street. This is a pre-1900 or older house that has been remodeled with new siding. Additions have been added to the rear. One clue indicating the early construction of this house, the one preceding and the one following, as well as other houses along Church Street and the older section of town, is that the structures are very close to the public sidewalk. Not much more than 6 feet in some cases. In the 1800s and early 1900s, a backyard needed to be large enough to contain a clothesline, a well, a cistern, a privy, often a chicken house and or a stable, and perhaps also some sort of shed for storage, which may have been a lean-to attached to the stable. So that's why typically front yards were a lot smaller back then, because they had to fit all of that stuff in the backyard. And so there's another trick that you can tell a house and its age based on how close it is to the sidewalk. And what's really cool here is we have a brick sidewalk that I'm walking on right now. So this is the next stop. This is 831 Church Street. This is another early house, possibly going back to the 1860s. It was the home of Henry Hagenbush around 1900. He operated a meat market on the southeast corner of 8th and Main Streets, and also started an ice plant in 1906 near the Wakarusa River on the north side of Eudora. His son Harry worked with him in these enterprises. The house has been enlarged several times, both the taller 1.5-story part and the smaller additions on the back. The outline of a closed-in front porch can be seen on the north wall. Front porch. The door was apparently repositioned during an enlargement. A vertical trim board divides the exterior wall on the north side, indicating where the building was once enlarged. The property has been in the Just Haney family for many years, and it looks like they're building a garden or making an addition right there. Can't really tell. So, some new work going on right there. This is another older Eudora house. It's a 1.5-story home built before 1900 with attractive proportions. Mrs. Lena Eder lived here in the 1940s and 1950s. I wish I had more information on this house, but that's it, unfortunately. It's obviously very well taken care of today. And that brings us to the Old Holy Family Catholic Church, which I believe is one of the oldest existing churches in Kansas, really, dating back to 1864. This was the home of the Catholic congregation here in Eudora from 1864, I believe, up until 1963, when they moved to their new church on Birch Street. And at one point there was a steeple up there, but it blew down in a storm at one point. But they've taken great care of this building, and this building is still used for special occasions. And recently there's been an effort underway by Janet Campbell to put this building on the National Register of Historic Places. And I believe it will soon be listed on that register. I think everything's been put on hold because of the pandemic, but I think once all that is finalized, it will be added. I'll go ahead and do a walk around there. You can see all the stained glass windows. And quite clearly you can tell where they built this part on at one point. And there's a look at the other side. I think we're really fortunate that this building still stands and that it's in such great condition. There's really not many buildings like this left around in Kansas, and I think we're all very grateful to all the people over the years that have done their job to take care of this building, and that we can still enjoy it today. Yeah, looks like there's some initials carved. There's JR and BS. So this yellow house that I'm walking to is 911 Church Street. This house was built well before 1900. It's been enlarged and remodeled over the years. It was built by Frank Summer, who crafted the altar for the Holy Family Catholic Church across the street. The house still has its original trim. In a recent remodeling, it was discovered that there is a cistern in the basement. There is a well in the backyard, now filled in for safety. The home, as of 2007, is still owned by the descendants of the Summer family. That might be a little out of date, but maybe it still is. I'm not sure on that one. Yeah, and this one is 915 Church Street, an early 20th century house built around 1910. It was built by Frank Summer and has remained in the Summer family for many years. The structure has nice detailing. Note the porch columns and the bracketed overhang on the north side, where the upper story corners are square while the first story has windows in the shape of a bay. This is a 1.5-story structure, not a large home, but one of excellent proportions. Note the original hitching post in front by the street, which you can see right there. The next stop is 923 Church Street. We don't have much on this one, but that's 923 Church Street, which was another early Eudora home. I'm sure there's a lot more out there on that, but that's all we have. Well, there used to be a house right there. 927 Church Street was located there, I think, up until probably 2012, 2013, 2014, around there. It was another I house built before 1900. And you can still see the sidewalk there and the light post of where a house used to be. Our next stop is this house covered in vines, 931 Church Street. Remodeling in this building, including vinyl siding, makes it difficult to determine the history of this structure, but it likely began as an I house built before 1900. There would seem to be a front porch removed at some point. At present, there is a vacant lot south of this house at 939 Church Street. Assuming the Reber blacksmith shop was on 2 lots and that a house south of this one has not been raised, this would have been the first house that Edward and Pauline Mistley and their 4 children occupied when they came to Eudora. They rented it for $8 a month from Joshua Reber. You really can't see that lot. It's all grown in now. We're getting near 10th Street. 10th Street was K10 highway from probably the 1930s up until about 1976 or 1977. So K10 was a very busy street. Obviously, they built the modern one south of town in the late 70s. So there was an insane amount of traffic continuously on the street, which is why 10th Street was home to many filling stations. Only Casey's really survives, but there was a number of other filling stations here. It's been said that during the shift change at the sunflower plant, the traffic was so severe that people in town would plan their days around when the shift change was, because after the shift change, there was a constant line of traffic from the plant into Lawrence. So you didn't want to get caught on one side or the other of town during the shift change, so people planned their days around that. This is 938 Church Street, another early home built before 1900. This house has 2 front porches that you can see right there, one on 10th Street and one on Church Street. The building has the unusual horizontal clapboard siding, which you can see there, over which vertical strips of insulation have been nailed, which battens covering breaks between the strips, resulting in a broad and batten exterior appearance. John Lenahan owned this house while he was postmaster of Eudora in the 1960s and 1970s. And this house is the last house before we get to 10th Street. This is 939 Church Street, a modest version of a bungalow style. This was once the site of Joshua Reber's blacksmith shop. In the 1950s, W.M. and Una Kelly lived here and had the Eudora self-service laundry in their basement entrance at the rear. They also built a Dairy Queen type refreshment stand approximately the spot where Annabelle's is now located at 10th and Locust. Of course, Annabelle's isn't there anymore. Now it's a Mexican restaurant, but that is where the Dairy Street used to be. And if you go south of here, there's a few more older buildings, but after that, you really get into newer developments, buildings that were built in the 1950s and later, a lot of ranch-style homes out south of there until, of course, you get to the modern homes built near K10 Highway. And so that's just a little slice of Church Street here in Eudora, one of the most historic streets in Kansas, in my opinion, with a lot of really well-preserved architecture and a lot of history behind each one of these buildings. Thank you for joining me on this tour. I'm pleased to bring history to you, even if you can't come to us right now because of the pandemic. But Eudora is full of history, and we'll keep sharing it as much as we can. So thank you for watching.